Halo CE is one of the most beloved shooters ever made, but I have never enjoyed it personally. I find Halo 2, 3, and Reach to have much better campaigns. I'd even take Halo 4 over Halo CE easily, although I seem to have a love-hate relationship with the former in that case. The only Halo campaign I think is arguably worse than Halo CE is Halo Infinite, and maybe I'll make a video detailing all the reasons I despise Infinite at some point, but that's a topic for another day. Anyway, I've grown very tired of hearing excuses for Halo CE's flaws, and I want to quickly address 4 of the ones I hear most, so let's get right into it. Excuse number 1. But it's an old game. You can't judge an older game by modern standards. Guys, I don't care how old the game is. The game stands or falls on its own merits regardless of how old it is. You can't use the age of a game as an excuse to dismiss fundamental issues such as rampant copy-paste level design. It was definitely within Bungie's capabilities to tone down this repetitive design in 2001, but they chose not to and instead decided to pad the game out by artificially extending the length of just about every single level. All the developers needed to do to get rid of this problem was not reuse entire buildings 10 times in every mission. Why is that such a difficult idea for people to understand? Also, if Halo CE gets a pass for all its issues because it's an older game, why don't Halo 2 and 3 get the same treatment? Because they're sequels? So what? Halo 3 is 15 years old and Halo 2 is 18 years old. At what point does a game become old enough that all of its issues should just be dismissed because it's an older game? This idea has always been asinine to me because Halo CE's die-hard fans want to claim the campaign as a classic that stands the test of time and is better than every other campaign in the series. But then when people criticize the game, those fans just say, well, it's an older game so you don't get to judge it. What? Something has to stand up over time to be considered a classic because that's literally the fucking definition of what a classic is. Our understanding of the world around us improves with each passing day, and video games are obviously not excluded from that. And I'm not saying the age of a game shouldn't be considered in any capacity when evaluating its quality. I wouldn't criticize an NES game for having long load times because the technology for the faster load times we see in more modern games didn't exist at the time, so that wouldn't be a fair assessment. But guys, there's a reason why we drive around in cars instead of horse-drawn carriages. There's a reason why we use calculators to do complex math instead of using slide rulers. The modern methods are more efficient and they do the job better than the older methods do, so the older methods were phased out. Likewise, there's a reason why every modern game isn't designed like that one game from 2001 that you're convinced is the best game in the universe. Modern games use methods that are more efficient and are objectively better than older games in many ways as a result. It's not a matter of a video game being good and then magically becoming bad at a later date. It's about gaining a better understanding of what good design actually is and then reassessing previous opinions and viewpoints based on that. It's okay to form an opinion and then change it later. You don't have to stick to one perspective on every issue for your entire life. The fact that Halo CE's campaign was viewed as revolutionary in 2001 doesn't mean it's not okay for someone to look back at it later and say, you know what, this isn't really as good as I previously thought. That's called growing as a person and getting smarter as you learn new information. Excuse number 2. Yes, the story is simple, but video games don't need complex stories to be good. First of all, I 100% agree that a video game doesn't need a complex story to be good. To pick an example, Ori and the Blind Forest is a great example of an amazing game that doesn't have a complex story at all. The story is given to you in small tidbits that are just enough to make sure it stays in the back of your mind to give you good food for thought, and this does work for some games. However, it doesn't work for every game. If you're going to take the less is more approach with your story, then you need to have a gameplay loop that isn't heavily reliant on the story to be immersive. Otherwise, the story's lack of complexity will stick out like a sore thumb. In the case of Ori, I can enjoy the gameplay and not be annoyed by the simplistic narrative because it never feels like I'm doing something for no reason. There's always a goal in mind that motivates me to push forward, and I'm not constantly thinking, why hasn't X thing been explained more? On the other hand, Halo CE substitutes a proper story with vague lore that requires too many mental gymnastics to be interesting on its own. Having an 8-hour gameplay loop of nothing but shooting nameless, faceless aliens gets really old when you finish a mission that took you nearly an hour and you feel like you accomplished absolutely nothing from a story perspective by the time you reach the end. The story guides the gameplay in many games, and if the story is a great big blur of nothing for the majority of the adventure, the immersion of the gameplay is much more likely to suffer as a result. If you personally don't care about the quality of the story as it pertains to a video game, then that's fine. But to act like story quality and gameplay quality are completely independent of one another and that a change in perception of one doesn't ever affect perception of the other is absurd. Halo CE's story isn't simple in a "this is cool supporting material" type of way. It's simple in a "where's the rest of it" type of way. And when you have the player thinking "where's the rest of it," you have a serious problem you need to address. Excuse number 3. Getting lost is just part of the adventure. This excuse is normally brought up when people such as myself criticize Halo CE's level design for being boring and repetitive. I uploaded a video a while back that goes into greater detail regarding my issues with this game's level design, but for this video I'll keep it short and sweet. Getting lost in a video game can be an enjoyable experience, but that is dependent on one critical idea. The game has to give you the tools necessary to get unlost, and Halo CE does not do this. You don't have a map or a waypoint to use for reference to figure out where you are, unlike, wait for it, Ori and the Blind Forest. I know I'm bringing up that game a lot, but that's only because I think it succeeds in so many places where Halo CE fails. In Ori, you are often thrust into non-linear areas and you're not clearly told where the path forward is, but you're given enough resources to figure it out for yourself. On top of the aforementioned map and waypoint systems, the world isn't so massive that you get overwhelmed with options. Even in the Misty Woods, the only area in that game in which the map is disabled, you still aren't getting lost all the time because the level design is intuitive enough such that you won't really consider going down paths that you aren't meant to. How does all this relate to Halo CE? Simple. You have exactly one method to find the correct way to go in Halo CE: trial and error. There is no other reliable method that you can use throughout the entirety of the playthrough. Why? Because everything looks the same, so you don't have the ability to use your observational skills to figure out where to go. You have to pick an option and hope it's the right one, and if it's not the right one, you have to pick another, lather, rinse, repeat until you luck out and find the right way. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of getting lost in a video game. I usually prefer to have a clear goal and clear destination in mind because that's just how I think. That said, I am willing to explore around within reason, but when there's no indication of which pathway is correct, excluding these big ass arrows on the ground which are totally not an indication of the fact that the developers knew players would never find their way around these areas without their hands being held the entire time, that's not an adventure. That's just a chore that leads to you wandering around aimlessly doing nothing when you could have been progressing further into the game. In other words, dropping players into a level with little to no tools for survival and telling them to figure it out is bad level design. It's comparable to taking a person who grew up in a big city and throwing them into the forest without any wilderness training. That person would have basically no chance of surviving, and that's exactly what Halo CE is doing. So why people consider this to be a great decision that makes Halo CE amazing and worthy of heaps of praise is something I'll probably never be able to understand. On to excuse number 4, which is probably the dumbest one on this list. I like it because it's nostalgic. I can't really mince words here. Nostalgia is never, and I mean never, a good reason to say that a game is good. If your first defense of a game is to say that it's good because you're nostalgic for it, you are invalidating your own opinion right off the bat. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have an attachment to games you enjoyed playing in your childhood. I'm in my early 20s and I still remember my time with games such as F-Zero GX very fondly. I played the hell out of that game as a kid and I still cherish all the good times I had with it. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that F-Zero GX is a perfect game and that it has no flaws. That game has some awful collision detection at some points, and the less I say about the voice acting, the better. It's okay to cherish good moments from the past, but it's important not to let the past dictate everything you believe about the present to the point you're not even evaluating anything properly in real time, because some other thing you're nostalgic for just has to be better than everything else. I see plenty of fans of Halo CE going into in-depth statements about how much their nostalgia impacts their love for the game, but then they simultaneously claim their opinions are grounded and not biased in any way, which seems like a pretty blatant contradiction to me. And this gets into a problem that doesn't just apply to Halo CE, but the video game industry in general. A significant portion of gamers seems to be completely satisfied with seeing the same games remade over and over and over again. Because every game needs to be exactly like that one game from 20 years ago, otherwise it's just not good enough for some reason. What's more, many of these remakes aren't even worth the money because they're just re-releases of the original game on a newer console or an update that doesn't improve upon the original 10% as much as it should. I always aim to analyze a game with as much objectivity as possible when making a formal review of it, and nostalgia and objectivity don't mix. So I would seriously encourage you to rethink your thought process if nostalgia is what drives the majority of your analysis, because an abundance of nostalgia doesn't allow you to move forward when things get better later. Rather, it keeps you stuck in the same place because you've made a subconscious decision that things will never get any better. Halo CE provides an extremely flawed experience, and if you're hell-bent on examining everything through nostalgia goggles, you are going to continue to be blind to the game's problems. You don't have to despise the game with a passion like I do, but at least be honest and don't rely on nostalgia for everything. There you have it, guys. My thorough thrashing of Halo CE is complete. Feel free to let me know if you agree with my critiques in the comment section, or feel free to crucify me if you believe everything I said was absolute heresy, because I'm sure some of you will be heavily motivated to do that. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.